The moving truck pulled away just as dawn began to glow over the rows of neat suburban homes in Willow Creek Estates. David Williams stood on his new front porch, breathing in the quiet of the morning. At 62, his frame was still broad, his back straight, though his knees ached with every shift of weight. A retired Army sergeant, he carried himself with the same discipline he had worn in uniform. From the small box he'd carried himself, one he never let the movers touch, David pulled out a neatly folded American flag. The fabric was worn but cared for, its colors still bold. He had carried it through deployments in Iraq and Afghanistan. He had held it at the funerals of friends who never made it home. To him, it wasn't decoration, it was memory, it was promise. He walked slowly down the steps, crossed to the flagpole anchored in the soil of his new front yard, and clipped the flag to the rope. With steady hands, he raised it high until it caught the morning breeze and unfurled above him. David saluted. Not a quick, casual gesture, but the sharp, precise movement ingrained in him by decades of service. "Still flying, boys," he murmured quietly. "Still flying." Across the street, curtains twitched. A neighbor, an older woman with perfectly trimmed hedges and a clipboard tucked under her arm, watched with a pinched expression. Karen Whitfield, president of the Willow Creek HOA, pursed her lips and muttered to herself, "Too large, too loud, not in compliance." She turned away from the window and scribbled something onto her pad. Later that afternoon, David's daughter, Mia, stopped by with groceries. She found her father on the porch, sitting in a rocking chair, the flag rippling above him. "You got it up already," she said, smiling. David nodded, his eyes fixed on it. "First thing I did. Before the boxes, before the furniture. Had to let them know." "Let who know?" Mia asked. "The boys I lost," David said softly. "The neighbors. Myself." He paused, then gave her a wry grin. "And anyone else who thinks I've got no right to it." Mia's smile faltered. "You think people are going to give you trouble here?" David shrugged. "I've lived long enough to know someone always does. But I won't back down. Not from this." That night, as the flag's silhouette rippled in the glow of the street lamp, Karen walked her poodle briskly past David's house. She stopped, narrowed her eyes at the pole, and shook her head. "This won't last," she muttered under her breath. Inside, David sat at his kitchen table, reviewing paperwork from the VA, a mug of black coffee cooling beside him. He didn't see her scowl. He didn't hear her words. All he knew was the flag outside his window, the flag he had sworn to honor, was flying free. And as long as he had breath, it would stay that way. The first letter came on official Willow Creek Estates stationery, thick and glossy, as if the weight of the paper alone was meant to intimidate. David found it folded neatly in his mailbox, stamped with the HOA's evergreen tree logo. He stood by the curb, sunlight warming the back of his neck, and read aloud, "Dear Mr. Williams, it has come to our attention that the flag displayed at your residence exceeds the allowed size under Willow Creek HOA guidelines, Section 4.2. Please correct this violation immediately or be subject to fines." David let out a low breath, half amusement, half exasperation. He folded the letter carefully, slipped it into his pocket, and looked up at the flag, still swaying proudly in the breeze. "Too large, huh?" he muttered. "I've seen it fly over bases twice this size." Over the next week, more letters came, each colder than the last. One claimed the rope used to hoist the flag was noisy when it clinked against the pole in the wind. Another complained that the flag was distracting to neighbors when it caught the afternoon sun. One even accused him of creating a disruptive environment because his morning salute apparently startled Karen's poodle. David stacked the letters neatly in a manila folder, labeled HOA, flag. He wasn't a man who believed in throwing away paper trails. The whispers in the neighborhood grew sharper, too. At the community park, David overheard a pair of men talking near the benches. "Don't get me wrong," one said. "I respect service. But does he have to flaunt it every day?" The other chuckled. "Yeah, it's a little much. We get it. You were in the Army. That doesn't mean you get to ignore the rules." David kept walking, jaw tight, hands curled into fists at his sides. He had fought through sandstorms and gunfire without blinking. But this? This was different. Insidious. Quiet. Death by 1,000 cuts. Karen escalated. At the monthly HOA meeting, she flipped open her binder with a theatrical snap. "The flag at 214 Maplewood is in direct violation of our standards," she announced, her tone dripping with disdain. "It's too big, too gaudy, and frankly, divisive." "Divisive?" a neighbor echoed, frowning. "It's the American flag." Karen pursed her lips. "Exactly. Some of us don't appreciate being forced to look at militarism every morning. This neighborhood prides itself on unity, not division." A few nodded hesitantly. Others shifted uncomfortably in their seats. No one challenged her outright. David wasn't there to defend himself. He was working late at the VA clinic, helping another veteran navigate a mountain of paperwork. By the time he came home, another letter had already been taped to his door. That night, as the flag rustled in the cool breeze outside, David sat at his kitchen table, the new letter spread before him. His daughter, Mia, leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "They're not going to stop, Dad." David nodded slowly. "I know." He looked toward the window, where the flag's shadow danced against the curtains. "But neither am I." The Willow Creek clubhouse smelled faintly of lemon polish and coffee as folding chairs scraped against the tile floor. It was the monthly HOA meeting, and the room was more crowded than usual. Word had spread Karen had put the flag issue on the agenda. David sat in the second row, wearing a pressed collared shirt and the same calm expression he'd worn in uniform during briefings. His posture was steady, hands folded on his lap, but inside, he could feel the burn of anticipation. He had debated whether to come, but Mia had insisted. "If they're going to talk about you, Dad, you deserve to be there to hear it." Karen stood at the podium, binder clutched to her chest like a shield. She wore a crisp white blouse, her pearls glinting under the fluorescent lights. "Item 3, she announced, her voice sharp. "That the continued violation at 214 Maplewood. Mr. Williams' flag." A murmur rippled through the room. Karen flipped open her binder with a dramatic snap. "This is the third month we've had to address this. The flag remains oversized, the pole is unsightly, and frankly, the display is," she paused for effect, "in poor taste for our neighborhood." David felt his chest tighten. Poor taste. She might as well have said poor man. A hand went up from the back. It was Mr. Thompson, a quiet retiree with a gray mustache. "It's the American flag, Karen. I don't see how that's poor taste." Karen's smile tightened. "We're not debating patriotism, Robert. We're enforcing standards. We can't have one person thinking they're above the rules." Her gaze slid deliberately toward David. A few heads turned to follow, and suddenly all eyes were on him. Karen leaned forward, her voice syrupy with contempt. "And let's be honest, flying a flag that large every single day, it feels more like showing off than honoring anything. Maybe some people want to parade their past, but this community values peace, not noise." A chuckle escaped from one corner of the room. Someone muttered, "Yeah, we get it. He's a soldier." Heat rose in David's face, but he didn't move. He locked his hands tighter, knuckles pale, forcing himself to stay calm. Finally, he rose to his feet. The room hushed. "With respect," he said, his voice steady but firm, "I didn't spend 20 years overseas, watching good men and women die under that flag, just to come home and be told it's too ugly to look at." The silence deepened. Karen's lips parted in a faint scoff, but her eyes flickered, just for a moment, with unease. David continued, "That flag isn't about showing off. It's about sacrifice. It's about brothers I buried, friends who never came home, families who still wait for folded triangles instead of embraces. If you call that poor taste, then maybe you don't understand what it stands for." A smattering of applause broke out from the back. A few neighbors nodded. Others looked away ashamed, as if suddenly realizing the cruelty in Karen's words. Karen slammed her binder shut. "This is not the place for speeches. We will be issuing a final warning to Mr. Williams. Either comply or face fines." The gavel came down with a sharp bang. But even as the meeting adjourned, David noticed something shift. People lingered, glancing at him differently than before, not with disdain, but with a flicker of respect. Karen had tried to humiliate him. Instead, she had revealed her own pettiness. And David, standing tall with quiet dignity, had reminded them all that his flag wasn't just fabric. It was history. It was blood. It was home. The letter was waiting for David when he returned from the VA clinic one evening, its envelope stamped in bold red. Final notice. He sat at the kitchen table, the lamp's glow pooling across the wood grain as he slid it open. His daughter, Mia, hovered by the counter, arms folded, as though bracing for impact. David read aloud, his voice steady though his jaw tightened. Mr. Williams, this is your final warning. Failure to remove the oversized flag and pole within 10 days will result in a daily fine of $250 and potential legal action, including lien and foreclosure proceedings. Compliance is non-negotiable. He lowered the letter, staring at the words as if they were smoke after a gunshot. Foreclosure? Mia whispered, outraged. They're threatening to take your house. Over a flag? David slid the paper across the table and leaned back in his chair. His face was calm, but his eyes carried the weight of old storms. They think intimidation will make me fold. They don't know me very well. The next day, Karen herself showed up at his driveway, heels clicking against the pavement. She held her clipboard like a sword, her expression smug. Mr. Williams, she said, looking past him at the flag that danced boldly in the afternoon breeze. You've received your notice. I expect the matter will be resolved quickly. David stepped onto the porch, arms folded. The matter is resolved, Ms. Whitfield. The flag stays. Her lips curved into a thin smile. Then you'll leave us no choice but to pursue legal action. I should warn you, our HOA has never lost a case. David's gaze didn't waver. Neither have I. Karen blinked, caught off guard, but recovered quickly. Then we'll see you in court. She spun on her heel and marched away, her little dog scurrying behind her. That night, David sat on the porch, his flag silhouetted against the starlit sky. He thought of dusty bases overseas, of nights where mortar fires shook the earth, of mornings when he folded flags to hand to mothers who would never again see their sons. His fingers curled into fists. They think this is about an HOA rule, he murmured, almost to himself. But this is about every brother and sister who didn't make it home. I swore I'd never stop honoring them. Not in Iraq, not in Afghanistan, and sure as hell not in Willow Creek Estates. Mia, standing behind him, placed a hand on his shoulder. So what now, Dad? David turned his eyes to the flag, its colors glowing faintly in the moonlight. Now, we fight back the only way we can. We take it to court. The HOA had drawn a line in the sand. But David Williams was no stranger to battles, and this time, the battlefield wasn't desert or jungle. It was a courtroom. And he was ready. The county courthouse was a tall stone building with columns that gave it an air of timelessness, a place where the weight of decisions lingered long after the gavel fell. On the morning of the hearing, the steps buzzed with murmurs and camera shutters. Word had spread. A decorated black veteran fighting his HOA over the right to fly the American flag. David Williams walked up those steps with deliberate calm, wearing his old Army dress uniform. The fabric was worn but spotless, metals gleaming across his chest. His gait was steady despite the ache in his knees, and his face carried the unshakable dignity of a man who had carried burdens heavier than this. At his side, Mia held his arm, her presence a silent anchor. Inside the courtroom, the benches were filled. Some residents of Willow Creek sat stiffly together, whispering behind programs. Others, veterans from neighboring towns, hospital staff David had once helped, even a few strangers moved by the story, sat scattered throughout, their faces resolute. At the plaintiff's table sat Karen Whitfield, immaculate as ever, her pearl necklace glinting under the lights. She wore her confidence like armor, her binder thick with documents. To her, this was about order and rules. To David, it was about something far greater. The judge, a silver-haired woman with sharp eyes, called the session to order. Karen's lawyer began first, his voice dripping with formality. Your Honor, this is not a question of patriotism. We respect Mr. Williams's service, but the HOA has clear, democratically approved regulations regarding property aesthetics. The defendant's flag exceeds permitted size and disrupts the uniformity of the neighborhood. If we allow one exception, we invite chaos. Karen nodded vigorously, lips pursed. David's attorney, a younger veteran named Marcus Hill, rose next. He gestured toward David. Your Honor, with respect, this is not about chaos. It's about rights. Specifically, a veteran's federally protected right to display the flag he served under. My client is not in violation of the law. He is exercising the very freedom he and others risked their lives to defend. The judge's eyes flicked toward David, studying him. Mr. Williams, would you please take the stand? David stood, his uniform crisp, and walked to the witness box. As he took his oath, the courtroom hushed. Mr. Williams, Marcus began gently, could you tell the court what this flag means to you? David's voice was low but steady. It means brothers I buried overseas. It means the promise I made to their families, that their sacrifice would never be forgotten. It means every night I came home alive when others didn't. This flag isn't cloth to me. It's memory. It's honor. It's pain. It's home. The courtroom sat in silence, hanging on his every word. Karen's lawyer cleared his throat. Mr. Williams, no one doubts your sincerity, but surely you understand the need for rules. Doesn't allowing exceptions undermine the very order that makes a community livable? David's gaze hardened. Sir, I've lived under stricter rules than you could imagine. Rules of combat. Rules that meant life or death. But there was always one thing we all agreed on, no matter rank, race, or background. That flag. We saluted it every morning, folded it for our fallen every night. If you think honoring it undermines order, maybe you've forgotten what this country stands for. Even the judge leaned back slightly, her expression thoughtful. A murmur of approval rose from the veterans in the gallery. When David stepped down, the room felt different, charged, heavy with truth. Karen shifted uncomfortably, her confidence cracking. Her turn to speak came, but her words about aesthetics and neighborhood unity rang hollow after David's testimony. She sounded petty, small, like a woman arguing about flower beds while standing in a graveyard. By the end of the session, it was clear the courtroom wasn't just listening to rules. They were weighing dignity, sacrifice, and justice. And David Williams had made his case, not just with words, but with the weight of a life lived in service. The courtroom was packed again the following week, when Judge Eleanor Marshall returned to deliver her decision. The atmosphere felt heavier than the last hearing. Neighbors sat stiffly in their pews, veterans in dress caps and jackets lined the back row, and Karen clutched her binder so tightly her knuckles had gone pale. David sat quietly at the defense table, his uniform neatly pressed, his face calm but unreadable. He had faced ambushes and firefights overseas. This, he told himself, was just another battle. Yet his daughter Mia noticed the way his fingers tapped once against his knee, a soldier's quiet tell that his nerves were alive. Judge Marshall entered, her gavel striking once. The room hushed. I have reviewed the arguments from both parties, she began, her tone crisp, carrying easily through the chamber. The HOA argues this case is about community aesthetics and order. Mr. Williams and his counsel argue it is about rights, dignity, and the law. She adjusted her glasses, glancing down at her notes. Federal law, specifically the Freedom to Display the American Flag Act, clearly protects the right of a homeowner to display the United States flag on residential property, notwithstanding homeowners association regulations. A ripple of murmurs spread through the gallery. Karen stiffened, clutching her pearls. The judge's voice sharpened. The HOA's repeated harassment of Mr. Williams, including threats of fines and foreclosure, is not only without legal basis but, in this court's view, an affront to the very principles the flag represents. This is not about aesthetics. This is about respect. For the law, for service, and for sacrifice. She leaned forward, gaze locking on the HOA representatives. The court rules in favor of Mr. Williams. The HOA is hereby ordered to cease all attempts to restrict his display of the American flag. Furthermore, the HOA will cover the defendant's legal fees and issue a written apology for their actions. The gavel came down with a firm bang. "This case is closed." For a moment, silence hung in the air, as if the room itself was absorbing the weight of her words. Then, slowly, the sound of applause rose from the back. Hesitant at first, then thunderous. Veterans stood, clapping and saluting. Families cheered. Even some neighbors who had stayed quiet through the ordeal now rose to their feet, moved by the clarity of justice. David closed his eyes briefly, a long breath escaping him. When he opened them, Mia was already gripping his arm, her eyes wet with pride. Across the room, Karen's face was crimson, her binder trembling in her hands. She tried to speak, but the words caught in her throat. Finally, she snapped it shut and stormed out of the courtroom, her heels echoing in the hall like retreating firecrackers. David rose slowly, shook his attorney's hand, then turned to the gallery. An elderly veteran in a faded cap stepped forward and saluted him. David returned it with the same crisp precision he had given the flag on his first morning in Willow Creek. The battle was over, and this time, he had won. The morning after the verdict, the sun rose golden over Willow Creek Estates. For the first time in weeks, David Williams awoke without a knot in his chest. He brewed his coffee, put on his pressed collared shirt, and stepped out onto his porch, carrying the flag he had guarded like treasure through war and peace alike. Neighbors had already begun gathering on the sidewalks. Word of the court's ruling had spread quickly, faster than gossip ever had. Some came with small flags of their own. Others brought their children, holding their hands and whispering, "Watch closely." Veterans from surrounding towns arrived in uniform, standing tall with their caps tucked under their arms. David paused at the base of the flagpole. For a moment, the world seemed to go still. He clipped the flag to the rope, raised it slowly, deliberately, until the breeze caught it and the stars and stripes unfurled fully against the clear morning sky. With practiced precision, he lifted his hand to his brow and saluted. This time, he was not alone. One by one, the crowd followed, hands pressed to hearts, veterans raising their own salutes. Even children mimicked the gesture, their faces solemn in the quiet gravity of the moment. The silence was broken only by the flap of fabric in the wind. Mia stood off to the side, tears streaking her cheeks as she whispered, "They finally see it, Dad. They finally see you." Karen was nowhere to be found. Rumors swirled that she had resigned her HOA position in embarrassment, her authority shattered. But no one missed her presence. For once, Willow Creek belonged not to pettiness and rules, but to dignity and unity. Later that evening, neighbors approached David on his porch, offering handshakes, casseroles, apologies. One man cleared his throat awkwardly. "I should have spoken up sooner, Sergeant. I'm sorry I didn't, but I'm here now." David met each hand, each word, with quiet grace. "The flag doesn't ask for perfection," he said. "Just respect." At sunset, as the flag glowed in the fading light, the neighborhood gathered again. Children waved sparklers. Veterans shared stories. Families lingered together. No one mocked, no one whispered. Instead, they honored. For the first time since moving in, David didn't feel like he was carrying the weight of his service alone. He felt what he had always fought for: community, belonging, and respect. And as the last light of day slipped away, the flag on his porch flew proudly, not just as his symbol, but as theirs.